Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 13th edition of Next is Now, a Future of Farming podcast. I'm your host, Brian Brunson with GFL Ag, and my co-host, Dan Aberhart from Aberhart Ag Solutions.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. What we do now, Brian, has such a big impact on what happens next in the world of farming, and that's why on this show, we always like to say, next is now.
Now. That's right, Dan.
Is there an echo in here?
Yeah. We'll continue to discuss and debate topics that make a difference to farmers' operations. Now, I'll ask a lot of questions just to get the layman's view of farming and how those things apply to the world in general, because it's my job at GFL to kind of understand these things and hopefully help you guys and girls produce better.
Hey, man, I love imparting these agricultural wisdoms. Imparting them upon yourself and the audience, all the little research and interesting things that come together in the show, always at the last minute, of course. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, and we have a great show for you today.
Awesome. So today, Dan and I were kind of curious about the topic of ecologically friendly agriculture. I mean, what does that mean? What's going on the show today?
I know. You know what it means? It means using your noggin and common sense and in a way that's good for the environment while providing food and energy. And I didn't want to use any buzzwords because, so painful. I mean,
like the one word that starts with an S.
I don't want to say it. Can we do the show without saying it?
Okay.
Please?
All right.
Or if we say it, can we ask the editor to bleep it out?
Every time we say sustainability, I want to hear beep.
Please, because I think it's been overused, used and abused. And, I'm really proud of what we do with Bio-Sul and with GFL Ag as being common sense and good for the farmer. But we don't want to get too caught up in these buzzwords because it doesn't always make sense. I mean, if you watch that Penn and Teller episode called BS, it was like, I can't remember exactly what episode it was, but they talked to, right? They were talking about how it feels so good to recycle, but a lot of the recycling actually doesn't serve a purpose. So we want to make sure that what we're doing actually serves a purpose, is common sense, and I'm excited to talk about that on the show today.
That's excellent. So, what do we have on the show today?
Well, I wanted to do a little bit deeper dive into what constitutes what we're doing here at GFL Ag and the nuts and bolts of Bio-Sul, because we haven't really talked about that for a while. It's such a cool story, and I've got some more cool angles to talk about the main ingredients of Bio-Sul, which are compost and elemental sulphur, and then how it relates to farmers' production. So that's really cool. I think we'll talk about that. And then, if time permits, and if the editor deems is cool, we'll do a little bit of a review of a conversation that I had with Dr. Pascal Baidu, who's doing some really interesting research with Ducks Unlimited about wetlands and whatnot. But I did speak on Coffee Row with a number of folks in the industry that are doing some really cool things that I would consider ecologically advantageous to farmers without saying that word, and makes a lot of common sense. So I'm very proud of that, and we want to talk about that. And then in the community feature, we're going to talk about, I went on a trip recently to France, which you're familiar where I went there with TMAC Agro. You have a little bit of a different angle, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, we won't get too deep into that, but I am excited to hear about your French experience, your French connection.
Yeah.
But it sounds like a packed show. So if you're passionate about agriculture and you want to stay ahead of the curve, then tune in to Next is Now and get ready for some thought-provoking discussion, unbiased opinions, and a deep dive into the future of farming. So Dan, we don't say the name too often on here, even though it's one of the main reasons we are here, because we're trying to just give information to farmers to help them be better producers. But our product at GFL is Bio-Sul. And, I want to get your thoughts on Bio-Sul. Tell us what you really think about it. I know you won't be biased at all.
Well, this is going to be a big reveal, what I actually think about Bio-Sul. Everybody's listening carefully, leaning into the radios all across the land. It's like a wartime address.
There we go.
when we were touching on this subject of ecologically friendly agriculture, really what we do comes to mind, and it's worth revisiting because sometimes we take it for granted or forget about it. It's a very interesting story. So we got two very simple ingredients. One is compost and one is elemental sulphur. And if you look a little bit deeper, there's a really big story behind this. And I guess what gets my goat sometimes, or can be a challenge, just looking at things from the outside in, is, farmers can often be vilified for their practices, but the reality is, people wouldn't have, the time and the energy and the space and the be that high on the Maslow's hierarchy to complain about such things if it wasn't for cheap food and cheap energy supplied by farmers. And if we switch our lens a little bit and look in other directions, and folks in urban centers could also self-reflect, Canadians generate over 50 million tons of food waste, 50 million tons. And the average Canadian household, I don't know about you guys in Texas, but the average Canadian household is responsible for about 140 kg of wasted food annually. So,
well, considering that you have about 40 million people in the whole country, it's almost like a ton per person.
It is, and it's $1,300 a year per household, and that's a huge deal too for folks that we're dealing with inflation, we're dealing with shrinkflation. I'm not sure if you ever heard of shrinkflation. Mm-hmm. Like you're charging the same or more for a bottle of ketchup that's now smaller. Yeah. So this is, and these are probably old statistics too, as and you got to be careful with statistics, but this is 2.3 million tons of edible food wasted every year, and it costs Canadians over $20 billion. And the environmental toll of this waste is substantial. It's equivalent to 7 million tons of CO2 emissions. It's the same thing as having 2.1 million cars on the road. And it's just not only a loss of valuable resources, but it's the whole greenhouse gas things. It's a lot of concern. So, I guess the message that, I encourage farmers to grab upon here is when you use a product like Bio-Sul, we're doing so much for the environment. And really, with some of the stuff that's going on with carbon exchange and markets, and I don't even want to say the other word you should bleep out is carbon taxes. If you could put a bleep credits on carbon taxes, but it should be credits to the producer too for doing things like this. I mean, some of the benefits of this compost is incredible. Like, we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We know that when organics go to landfill, it produces a lot of methane, which is 25 times as potent as CO2. Of course, it's got a lot shorter half-life and all that good stuff, but composting really helps reduce that. We're improving soil health by putting on compost. It's a whole living ecosystem, as we'll hear later on Coffee Row from one of the folks that's doing some mobile composting on farms. It's a lot about water conservation, where, hey, a lot of the prairies right now is super dry. So soil moisture holding capacity, retaining that moisture. When you throw out organics, it's a lot of volume and a lot of weight, and 70% of that is moisture. So that's a big thing. And then the waste management costs in urban centers, the footprint it takes to spread this stuff out on landfills. The biodiversity associated with compost, like the microorganisms in compost, are incredible. Heating this stuff up to 60 degrees for months on end and taking all the moisture out of it, and reducing the volume by half so it can be spread on fields. The way it helps manage pollution. And it was interesting too, talking to this mobile composter guy. I've got a clip from him later. He said that folks are reducing some of their synthetic fertility by great amounts by using large amounts of compost. And that's not necessarily economically or logistically viable everywhere, but when you mix it with other things like sulfur, we're sending it out 10 times the distance that would normally be associated with an economical range of compost. Normally, economically speaking, logistically speaking, compost would have a 150 kilometer radius, sorry. I get my metrics and imperials mixed up in your Texan presence.
Sorry.
But I don't think Texas will ever go metric. God bless you. God bless America.
Yeah, if it started happening state by state, we would definitely be the last. So
You'd be the last.
yeah,
Still crying freedom.
that's it. That's right.
But in the bigger economic climate picture, compost is just such a wicked solution. And I think we talked about it in a episode where we talked specifically more about compost. They've done studies where even in California, as urban as it is, with as little farmland as they have, you could get all of the urban waste out onto farm fields in a very fortuitous way for everybody involved.
Yeah.
So it's just a really neat story that we're using this compost, and by using a product like this, which is effortless, it's economical, it improves logistics, it's a lot of good things. Not to do a big sell job, but going back to a common sense reminder of this is a great story that we're involved with, Brian.
Right. No, and I agree. And again, it's like you said, it's not like this is not an infomercial. But seriously, how many opportunities do you get to actually make a little bit of a difference? And we're not going to cure all the world's problems with this product, but it helps. And every little bit helps. And we can do this at a corporate level. That's just great, because it's a big problem out there. Greenhouse. We can see all that stuff with the weather in these past few years. That's a huge problem. If we can help it any way, and this product isn't going to exacerbate the issues we already have, I think it's a win-win. It makes complete sense to me.
Well, one of the big things that I had some eureka moments too, talking to a fella by the name of Dr. Pascal Baidu there from Ducks Unlimited, and the work that they're doing is, and just the chatter in the industry too, is our customers want to know, what is our footprint producing this stuff? How are we economically, sustainably doing this? And so we can have a leg up on our competition in terms of commodity production if we can show that it's being done in an environmentally friendly way. And my brother's actually working on a sustainable food ingredient label, pristine ingredients, that would track and show the benefits and show the environmentally friendly angles that are being taken by producers that are conventional, like my brother. He's not organic. Organic's a whole nother ball of wax.
Right.
And it has its virtues and it has its place. But on our farm, we still use chemical fertilizer and chemical herbicides and fungicides and insecticides and stuff as need be, but we're moving towards better solutions, and we want farmers to get compensated for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like I said, things aren't going to change overnight in the world, and the majority of the farmers still use chemicals, and they have to. But I think that can be done in a responsible fashion, which it sounds like that's what your brother's doing with this, pristine label. We definitely want to hear more about that and how that works.
Well, it came out of the Precision AI drone project that they were working on. That it's a 27-foot wingspan drone that has cameras and nozzles on the belly of it. It's huge, and it flies at 70 kilometers per hour, and it's sophisticated enough in real time to see the weed. It's got over 50,000 weeds that it knows, and it will physically spray each weed, even in a green-on-green situation. So you can have a green weed in the middle of a wheat crop, and it can spray just that weed at 70 kilometers an hour.
So it'll fly over at 70 and like freaking laser zap a weed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it squirts the appropriate chemical, but right now, obviously chemicals are broadcast wholesale across everything: soil, plants, anything that's underneath the boom of the sprayer. Yeah. I sold sprayers for 13 years, so I'm very familiar with this. But now, we've got this technology. So after they realized, hey, this is an 85% reduction in chemical usage, we could probably sell this to somebody. They started selling this crop, like peas, for example. They could sell to Roquette at Portersville Prairie, where they process peas, for a premium. And so it added not only to the chemical savings, the equipment savings, probably the long-term, environmental savings. It added to the it added to the bottom line by getting a premium for this. So then they realized, well, there's probably a lot of folks that would like to pay for this, both as companies that are thinking about their, the healthy qualities of their product, as well as their environmental footprint, as well as consumers. I mean, realistically, the less processed ingredients and chemicals you can have in your food, the better for your biome as such,
Right.
the better for your general health, which is the direction everybody, myself included. The more natural my food can be, the better.
Yeah, no, I'd like to see a video of that drone with the sniper version of a super soaker under it. Freaking, I think that'd be pretty cool.
But the other ingredient that I wanted to touch on too is elemental sulfur. And in Alberta, where the product is made, it's local. The creation of elemental sulfur is a huge deal. It's a huge byproduct that it comes from the processing of sour gas and oil, which, the sour gas, as it gets more sour, it contains high levels of hydrogen sulfide. So they're removing this. It needs to be removed to meet environmental standards, and also this hydrogen sulfide, it corrodes pipelines and equipment and stuff like that. So there's a series of steps that they use to treat this sour gas, and it's typically treated through a process with amine gas, and it's passed through a solution of water and amine, and which absorbs the H2S. But the mountains of this, it's hard to imagine the scale.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, like it is so massive. And so some of the challenges of this is that there's large stockpiles, the sheer volume of it, it just sticks out on the landscape.
Yeah, just
it's just piling up to the moon. I mean, there's environmental and economic implications, the storage and management of it. There's environmental and economic questions. It's a hazardous material. There can be runoff, there can be environmentally, concerning contamination. There's a lot of things that go on with this, and at some point it's got to be dealt with. At some point, right, there's going to be a remediation or a way to use it. But the world is really dependent on this stuff, but we're making a lot more than we can use, and it's used in the chemical industry. For production of sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid is a key industrial chemical that's used in so many processes and so many products.
Well, I mean, it sounds like a huge problem. What could we do to reduce?
What if,
like
one of those Marvel comic series?
What a great series. I can go down the rabbit hole on that. Oh,
right?
So
Yeah, imagine a universe in which we took this elemental sulfur, broke it up with an excavator, put it in a truck, pulled it down to Hanna, Alberta, blended it off with compost. We're using the compost as a carrier in a patented process to make a product called Bio-Sul. That's what we're doing, and it works really well to get that excess byproduct out on farmers' fields, and it's very economical. So that's one of the innovative uses for elemental sulfur, is getting on farmers' fields. It's hard to get onto farmers' fields without some sort of manufacturing, and this is probably the most natural way. And there's, like we talked about, with the benefits of the soil for with compost. It's a great combination.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's two streams we're taking out of basically detrimental aspects to the environment. So we're removing organics from the landfill, and we're taking byproduct from manufacturing and repurposing those things to grow food. I mean, it's such an easy story. I can say the word and get bleeped out here, but I mean, the loop there is great.
Don't do it.
I didn't say it.
Okay, we don't have to censor
but it makes
you.
sense.
Well, some of the things that it does is it improves the soil health when you put it on there. It's essential for plant growth. It's essential in the creation of protein. It's essential to help balance out your nitrogen. Nitrogen use efficiency is a huge huge thing. When it gets converted to sulfate form by the soil bacteria, it becomes readily available for plant uptake, and sulfur deficiency is a huge thing. We don't get sulfur from the atmosphere anymore, Brian. We don't have sulfur being emitted by manufacturing plants like we used to, and the acid rain used to feed the soil, which is, like I say, this whole recycling thing, everything's interconnected.
Which sounds like, if you just say that out of context, like we don't get enough acid rain or sulfur. I was like, what?
I'm pretty sure in the 80s, acid rain was going to kill everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
So elemental sulfur is a great form of sulfur too, where it's not immediately all available. It doesn't immediately leach away. It doesn't all aggregate in the low areas. It continues to release into the soil profile. So I think it's a really great fit in a lot of areas, in a lot of geographies. The higher topography areas will have higher pH. And that's one nice thing about elemental sulfur and higher pHs. It brings the pH down. It creates acidulation around the elemental sulfur particles, which helps release more nutrients. Like if I don't know if you've studied this at all, but if your body's in the proper pH range, you're better able to absorb and make use of nutrients, which, maybe you can probably leap over tall buildings given your athleticism.
Yeah, no, I just turned 50 last month. That's all. My tall buildings are behind me now.
How high are you jumping these days?
Elevator. I just, if you can slide a piece of paper underneath my feet, then I'm doing good. That's about as high as I want to jump right now. With these knees.
Yeah. Well, it's a great product for higher topographies, for higher pH soils. For areas that you're concerned about sulfate leaching away from the target zone of
would that
plants,
be
roots.
Most places in Canada, or what?
Hey, geographies vary, but there's a tremendous amount of very high pH soils where nutrients are very tied up because of that. And then in the lower pH areas, this can be a better, slower acidification than you would receive from a manufactured product like ammonium sulfate. So that's definitely something to discuss with your agronomist and take a look at what your pHs are at. And it's a great tool for addressing soil acidification, because a lot of these synthetic fertilizers as well, they'll have a negative impact. So using a more natural source like elemental sulfur and compost really makes sense. So
yeah.
And then when you help your crop be healthier, you're fighting disease. Sulfur is a huge component in resisting stresses like, diseases and drought. And so that all helps with, I don't know, I feel like this is a swear word too, but carbon sequestration. I want to be careful. Oh man, you're tired of reading about it in the Western Producer, but it's here. It's here. People, consumers want it, customers want it, governments measuring. If we don't get involved in these conversations, and if we're not providing, proactive solutions, it will get dictated. We will get the policies coming down the pipeline. It's already happening. So we got to get together and champion what we're doing, do better methods. I mean, it's a call to arms. I think different places, different places in industry, there's going to be profit in it. I think the good capitalistic producers that are business minded are looking for those opportunities, and there's only so much we can control, but we certainly can't have an impact or an influence on conversations that we're not even at the table. And we certainly, if we're not providing solutions, then it'll go the other way. It won't be the carrot, it'll be the stick. It's my humble opinion. So
that's a good point. And the good thing too about, the product in Bio-Sul, and you talked about the people are, a little bit more business minded and understand the economics behind this. I mean, can't be the product that you can put on and forget about it for a couple of years and focus on other things. I mean, I think that's a huge aspect too, and allow you to do some other things that you didn't have the time for previously. Wow, helping the environment a little bit. I think it's just so many positives too.
Well, and I wanted to share with you a little bit about my interview with Dr. Pascal Baidu, and I think in the interest of time, I don't think we'll go through all the clips. But some of the big takeaways I got from talking to Dr. Pascal Baidu. So this is an individual who's involved with a project that's across Western Canada. I think they were involved with the National Beef Council as well that was sponsoring some of this. But they're putting these very sophisticated sensors into wetlands. And these wetlands are essentially potholes that have been left behind by the glaciers, pockmarking the landscape. Where I grew up, there's zillions of them. And typically, I was kind of laughing because typically I'd swing over my cultivator wing or my harrow bar as far as I could into the slough to, just to see what you could do without getting stuck. Or, back in the day we were cultivating where it was like playing in the sandbox, just because we were like, hey, and if it got drier and you could try and farm that, you burn the cattails and plow it down and everything. Like basically we tried to drain as much as we could, like Smith Creek watershed. We did as much drainage as possible. It was Big Ducks Unlimited country, but it was really interesting talking to him, Brian, because there's so much more than meets the eye, and there's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect where you think something, for example, like, oh, there's a wetland. It's in the way. We've got a big cedar. Let's drain it so we can drive through, farm it, make money, go on with our lives. But the more that you start to know about these things, the more complicated and nuanced it is. And maybe, it'd be interesting to talk to my dad and my brother about their perspective on this. But I know there's a lot of land that you try to farm, but at some point it's just not worth it. So where's that line with wetlands? And what they're finding too with their research is that wetlands provide so much functionality in terms of, biodiversity, which helps, crop production. The insect and the whole ecosystem of the things that eat insects, and then the cooling effects, like as we get really hot temperatures in the middle of the summer, and that can just burn your crop down, especially we've had, drought and stuff like that. Well, if you have these wetlands, it substantially cools the crop down and helps them deal with, that abiotic stress. And then there's really interesting research as well about sulfate and how sulfate helps these wetlands sequester carbon as well. And these wetlands are carbon sinks. So we had the conversation about, well, one day will somebody on planet Earth please pay farmers for these assets that we can't get crops from, but maybe because they're carbon sinks and they support wildlife and they cool off crops and they support biodiversity and they clean water. Yeah. He said there's literally water quality trading markets now around the world. You know what a big deal water is going to be.
Right.
Maybe we'll get paid for this stuff. Maybe, for the benefit that it's doing, but we know, like my brother's done all that math. There's certain land you just can't farm as much as you try. And it's not like there's salinity when the water table's high, turns into kochia patches. You can pour all the inputs you want onto it, but it just doesn't make sense. It's a net drag on margins. So I found that really interesting to start to understand all the different benefits that wetlands do have. They're not necessarily just a net negative. Maybe over time, if we understand those better, there'll be different organizations or markets that will pay producers for that asset. And and as maybe machinery will go the other way, where it's not like we're trying to put a 100-foot drill through every field. Maybe it'll be more drones, and maybe we will be doing a little bit more diversity of cropping. And I don't know. Hopefully there's a way that in the future, all of this works together that is, you can bleep this out, that is sustainable for all parties, that it's not civil war, or people dictating policies, like things like are happening around the world. And this is a little bit political, but things like, the right to farm protests in Netherlands. Like, we don't want that kind of policing. We want collaboration and innovation and transformation. That's kind of our motto. So part of the conversation I had with him, and he's familiar with our area and he's familiar with farmers' position. It's like, hey, how do we all work together to leave, the nature that's practical and profitable for all? At the same time, man, we want everybody to have cheap food and cheap energy, and we want the farmers to do well,
Yeah, well, and it just goes back to people recognizing the importance of the producer. Like you say, we're in a society where we have the ability to create a podcast because we both have day jobs. We have enough free time to create a podcast because of the society that was created by abundance of food, which turns into abundance of time. I mean, it's the importance. I think you stated earlier. It can't be understated, and we need to start figuring out ways to support these guys more, and increase the the viability of farming for all involved.
Yeah, I agree. And people at some point will have to take their pick, right? Everybody's already been hit by inflation and shrinkflation. The more pressure on the farmers, the more of that there's going to be.
Yeah.
And to me, reasonably cheap food and energy is the foundation of civilization. It makes everybody healthy and happy. It reduces riots.
Mm-hmm.
It reduces hunger, which leads to riots.
Yeah.
And so, when you talk about food, it's one thing to have a hungry baby, but you got a hungry 18-year-old. It's a different dynamic.
Yeah. Maybe one day we'll figure out the whole free energy too. Cheap, clean, free energy.
Agriculture provides so many solutions, honestly. Yeah. I mean, you talk about harnessing the power of the sun and the soil. Like, I did a podcast on somebody who's vertically farming, and I guess one of my big takeaways was it's actually pretty tough to do, just by virtue of the fact you don't have the sun and soil, which are essentially free resources. Of course, we've got to steward the soil a little bit, but man, there's so much there. Like, you can't just replicate that in a factory or a lab. Right?
Yeah, no, it's tough.
Easily or profitably, very quickly. So I really enjoyed that conversation. I know people, farmer sensitivity around folks like Ducks Unlimited, and hopefully, folks can work together in such a way that everybody's, interests can be met. And I think most farmers too, they like to see, the ability to hunt and some wildlife and stuff on their land. And I mean, you got to be efficient. You got to be profitable, for farmers, and you can bleep this out. For farmers, sustainability means that their kids can farm. Like for my brother, it means that his 6 kids will have a business that's viable to farm in. And really, when I was growing up, it didn't really seem that way. It was really tough in the 80s. We had to walk uphill both ways to school, and we had no shoes.
Yeah. I remember those days. I was right there with you.
In the snow.
Yeah.
But no, I thought it was, either way, it's good to know more about what research is being done, where policymakers are going with things. Can we advocate for our own industry and make people understand? Because I don't think most people understand, the requirements of the industry and what's needed, So.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. So that's some of my thoughts on that what shall not be pronounced.
Bleeped out.
Ecological agriculture.
Yeah.
But we definitely continue the theme here with Coffee Row.
Yes.
With some of the folks that I talked to. The first one that I'd talk about is a fellow that I know from Westlock, Alberta, that they have a Class 1 composting facility. And they also do a really interesting thing whereby they do mobile composting. And it's really interesting because they have 10 or 12 farms that they go to, and they help them, produce compost. And it's not rocket surgery, but it does take a little bit of science and a little bit of understanding. And so what's really neat is that they're applying that compost to farmland, and farmers are reducing their synthetic fertility, and they're seeing a lot of benefits out of it. And you can reduce your synthetic nutrients over time. You have better disease fighting capabilities, better moisture holding capacity, and all that. So we could just take a quick listen to that, and it's very interesting.
We do get a lot of great feedback, and typically the folks we work with, the producers, they're going down the long road. It's a journey of soil health. We provide tools and a toolbox on their journey towards better soil health. We don't have all the answers by any means possible. Even, like soil scientists doing this for 30, 40 years say we know less than 1% of what's going on in the soil. But there's no question of the publicity and the news and the attention and the focus on soil health in the last many years. That composting is a very big tool, and it's something that it's not rocket science, but it is science, and there's a bit to it, but it really can have quite a big impact. Some of our producers when we start composting for them, and they're using other tools in a regenerative ag toolbox type thing, they're cut off synthetic fertilizer in 5+ years. And within a few years, they can drastically reduce the need for synthetic fertilizer, right? Guys are pretty happy about that, right? We have one dedicated Class 1 facility that's just municipal compost, municipal organic residuals. It's not waste. You can't call it waste. And then 10, 12 plus farm sites a year. Usually, we're basically farmers. We're composters, but we're farmers because we're managing microbial livestock. It's a custom service. Is typically what we provide, and we take their manure, bed pack material from livestock. They generate, right? We elevate it into a higher quality product. Typically, the volume is cut in half as well. So the feedlot guys are very happy about that. So they don't have to haul manure miles down the road. So we make compost and the volume's cut in half. And we're putting a living ecosystem on their fields. So it's like a palm full of compost. There's more living microbes than that than there is humans on Earth. I don't know. I've never checked, but that's what you hear a lot. So that's pretty impressive. You're putting 5-10 ton an acre on a field. There's a lot of lives to take care of. And in that, Dan, it's important. Like I stress to guys that this isn't when you're spreading or land applying and in management of the compost. It's very different from a truck full of fertilizer. Like there's a living system. You don't want to put. You don't want to go spreading compost on a field when the forecast is it's got 30 degrees in the sun for the next week. The microbes are just like us humans. We need water to drink. We need food to eat. That'll be bad for them. So you got to watch. You got to tend to the livestock in our soil and our compost, right?
They consider themselves farmers in terms of like trillions of microbes is what they're actually farming. Because you take a handful of this stuff and there's more organisms in than there is people on planet Earth.
It's crazy.
It's really neat. So I really like what they're doing with compost, and again, it just emphasizes the importance and the value of composting after solving all these problems from an urban setting. You have these incredible benefits, and I know Brian's seen it and Brian's living it, and it's also great because I think GFL collaborates with them a little bit in various ways and shapes and forms. But I really think composting is a big part of the future of dealing with society's issues.
For sure. And you don't want to say another bleep word, recycle, but I mean it's essentially the same thing. I mean, compost, you have to do it. There's no way around it. I mean, it's finite. We got a finite amount of space out there, and we got to take care of the land, and we got to reduce waste. Compost is the obvious answer for that.
Yep.
So
I'm also going to share my friends from Annalita. So on Coffee Row, we always also want to talk to our good friends from Annalita. They have a 90,000 square foot facility in Nisku, Alberta, just south of Edmonton, where they have 80 million worms. that weigh about 36,000 kilograms, and they live in these 1 meter deep worm beds that are 24 meters long by 2.4 meters wide. And of course, they're going to be vertically stacking them more as their production increases. But what I love about what they're doing is they're taking what Mother Nature has created, and they create a soil microbiome through the technology. And there's the red wiggler worms as the organic waste that would otherwise go to landfills moves through these beds. It comes out the other end 95% essentially worm castings, like it's gone through the body of the worm.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And they're very specific about what they feed these worms. You talk to Jamie, he's very adamant that like these are the best fed worms in the world. And in 45 days to 60 days, they've got this very rich worm castings that can be made into all kinds of things. And they talk about it being like a dairy, where you take the milk and you can make all kinds of products from it, right? You get milk from a cow and you make ice cream, you make yogurt, you make cheese. Well, they're making all kinds of stuff from liquids to granulated pellets. They've got a seed treatment. They've got stuff that can go with your fertilizer. It's not a fertilizer with an analysis as such like ours is. It's actually food for the soil, food for the microbiome in the soil. They've got products that speed up stubble digesters, so it helps break down the material that's left over after harvest. They do a lot of stuff in the lawn and garden and the turf market too. I mean, they can give you stuff that will help you with your dog pee spots in the backyard. They can make all kinds of stuff from this worm castings, but it's really incredible technology, and I think this is part of the future, even though it's ancient technology. But these worms digesting this I guess stuff that's left over. I mean, what are they using here? They're using cardboard and coffee grounds from restaurants and spent grain from breweries and leftover produce from grocery stores. So it's optimized for these worms, and the worms are actually fed by these battery operated wireless robots.
Wow.
So that's really neat as well.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I'm still stuck on the word castings. Is that what I think it is? Worm poop?
It is.
Hey.
It is. We can bleep that out too.
Yeah. Worm poop.
I'm excited for the fact that this is a natural product. It's got a lot of human intervention, but it's more or less self-sustaining. The fact that we're diverting food waste to make a product that helps grow more food. And we're doing it in an environmentally conscious and responsible way. And to see the effects after one season and customers coming back with their eyes wide open that, why haven't we looked at something like this before? It's so encouraging. We've got guys, I talked to a guy this morning, and this is his 4th year. He's now reduced his traditional inputs by 70%. And he's got all his neighbors that were skeptical. He's got all his neighbors asking him, how do we get involved? Another conversation with a farmer from Provost that on his own he started to reduce his inputs and hasn't seen a hit in yield, and he's starting to supplement with products like ours, and just by chance came across us on the internet. And we were an hour and a half on the phone this morning. I ended up sitting in the parking lot talking to him because I didn't want to end the call. So you get more and more people that are just waking up to the fact that we have to change something that is more than an NPK. And it's biology, it's Mother Nature. There's so much that we don't know of what we're putting in, but the whole worm process and the worm castings, the more I read about them, it's like such miracle. So I'm excited.
So awesome. we got microbe farmers, we got worm farmers.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so shout out to our friends at Annalita and at Elevate Organics. I should have mentioned my buddy Brian's company as well. They're doing really great things with compost. So, and then I guess this is going to roll right into in the community to wrap things up. But my last coffee row was from my buddy Mario Gaudet from TMAC Agro. And we went over to France with them, and I've got a quote here from Mario on how TMAC Agro is doing things sustainably.
I would say that our sustainability program, or where we feel sustainable fits, is nutrient efficiency, soil health, carbon capture, if that's what we can do and help with. We're working with different groups to help with the science, whether that's root rot complexes, like soil complexes, soil amendments, I should say. When it comes to stabilizers, how are we getting the best bang for our buck on fertilizers, whether that's adding additives to traditional fertilizers to make them more efficient, less loss, soil health in mind, not killing bacteria, soil amendments to help with aggregation, nutrient mineralization. And then when you're talking like things like top boss, I always think of high-end efficiencies, promoting yield. Those are what sustainable means to us, and how we could do that with obviously ecological perspectives in mind. How can we do this while with the environment in our minds, but still consider yield, growth, better farming practices. Our tagline is farm the future. That just, to me, that's like, how are we going to do this sustainably for longer? How can we do it more efficiently for longer? I just talked to you about we have this traditional discussion about a pound of pea is a pound of pea. And I want to say, is it though still? Is that still what it should be? Or can we just do this pound of pea with our products more efficiently? Can it be more effective? So I think that's what I would say to sustainability.
What I really enjoyed about TMAC Agro was me and my buddy Mike Pommier from Max Ag Consulting, agronomist buddy of mine, we flew into Paris. We took a train through the countryside to an area that you know very well. Well, it's St. Malo. St. Malo, I'm not sure exactly how far that is from Caen. Because, yeah. But when we got to St. Malo, that's where TMAC Agro was founded. And 65 years ago, the fishermen were bringing up these rocks from the ocean, marine coral or seashells, or full of calcium, very porous. So when farmers would spread it on the field, it would house a lot of microbiology, and it had a lot of different nutrients in it. And so this Daniel Rollier, he started crushing and granulating this marine coral rich in calcium, and turned it into a really big international company that now has 10,000 employees and $4 billion in revenue, and
wow,
a couple hundred patents, and they're in 109 countries, and they literally still go out with a boat, and they'll bring in 1,400 metric tons at a time. It kind of reminds me of Bio-Sul a little bit, because they got this big 50 or 60,000 metric ton pile of marine coral sitting on the dock, kind of like a pile of Bio-Sul.
Yeah.
And then they mix it and blend it and granulate it in with potash and phosphorus and all kinds of different fertilizer nutrients, and ship it all around the world, right? Very interesting.
No, I'm always amazed at the level of ingenuity, and just I would have never imagined grinding up coral. I mean, how does that even come about? It's just amazing to me.
Well, you wonder how the first people figured that out, but apparently it's been going on for decades, if not centuries. The other piece is they make a lot of biostimulants out of the seaweed and kelp that's there, because I don't know if you ever went, skinny dipping in the waves of northern France there. You don't have to share that whether you did or not. We don't need to paint any kind of picture for anybody listening to this. But the cool part is, with this 13-meter tide, the seaweed and the kelp there is so hardy that it really develops these special characteristics that they, press it and get these extracts, these compounds, and it's a biostimulant that helps plants grow. So that's where all the science is derived from, is the seaweed and the kelp and the coral and the marine coral, the calcium.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
No, yeah.
It's really
that
cool. And
is-
you have a story from up there too. Hey? You have a story
well,
from
mine isn't as cool as yours. There's no chemicals involved. There's no deep sea coral farming. But when I was still playing ball, I played ball in the south of France. I played in Cannes, and beautiful area. And I enjoyed being there. I enjoyed the scenery. I won't get into too many details about
Right.
my experience with the French culture, but
Right.
I'll say I played one season there and I didn't go back. But
I was happy to come home
enjoyed-
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But
Vive la
it's
France.
nice. I really like Bayou, which is a smaller town, much smaller than Caen. But Caen has an interesting history. Like the Canadians that came on D-Day to the coast of France there at Normandy, they made it easier than the Americans. I think the American beach at Omaha, they got mowed down really bad when they first came against the German defenses. But apparently the Canadians got inland quicker, and they got to Caen, but they couldn't get into Caen, and then so they bombed the heck out of Caen. So it's really interesting in that area of the world too, because there's so much World War II history, and then really a lot of those places along the coast, they were bombed and rebuilt in different ways. And St. Malo, they rebuilt it historically accurate, but they also made some of the streets wider, and it's really hard to fathom. It's really unbelievable history. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's again, the place was beautiful. The history is amazing there, and I definitely would go back to visit. But I lived there for a while, and I had enough.
well, it's good to come home, and
it's good to come home.
I was really happy to get home.
Well, man, I mean that's an awesome trip. Thank you for sharing that with us. But what I'd like to do is get some key takeaways from what we've heard today.
Well, you heard a lot from me. I talked a lot. I'm pretty passionate about this. I think it's important for the future. I'm concerned about some of the direction that society is going in terms of recognizing that we have to have a balance. Farmers have to be successful to continue to feed and power the world. And I think farmers are going to continue to evolve, and a lot of things come along that are common sense and economical, and just they're no-brainers that we figure out on our own, like zero-till, like Bio-Sul, like using marine coral, seaweed, figuring out that maybe wetlands aren't something to drain every single one of them, and work in harmony with nature. And I think it's a different quality of subject to the younger generation. I'm 48, my dad's 70. Like, on a scale, I can tell you that my 20-year-old kids are more in tune with that sort of thing, and it's hard to get older and realize you're not the center of the universe anymore when the young sort of usurp you in terms of their importance and stuff. But let's face it, our customers, our consumers, our children, everybody in the world's more and more concerned about this, and government policy and society's norms are all changing. And I really hope that through conversations like we had today, Brian, trying to listen to all sides, having, grown up, fully formed adult conversations with everybody, all the stakeholders, folks like my brother that are trying to get incrementally better. They're not going out and radically, doing the Chicken Little thing, or, trying to, immediately radically revolutionize farming in a way that's not, bleep me out here, sustainable. But we can make incremental changes to get better, and some of them are really profitable solutions, like zero-till and like Bio-Sul and like mobile composting, using worm castings, companies like T-Max with, so it gets me excited, and I hope we're doing some good, and hopefully folks enjoy the conversation and learn something from it. and it could help them steer their business in the right direction, because this is the reality sometimes, whether we really want it or not. Does that make sense?
I agree, and I think I got an overall positive vibe from this whole thing, because it seems like there's solutions out there, and we're heading in the right direction. So to me, I think the future is bright for agronomy. We just got to, like you say, have those adult conversations and keep things moving incrementally.
Shake and bake, baby. Shake and bake.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks for listening to Ricky Bobby shake and bake this whole episode, and I hope you've enjoyed Next Is Now. I'm Brian Brunson with Dan and Ricky Bobby Aberhart. Join us next time for a discussion on farming.